Now, with the cost of housing migrants rocketing to an eye-watering £8 million a day, the government has slashed the daily allowance for asylum seekers to £1.25, a move that refugee charities have described as unfathomable, with warnings that it could leave migrants destitute. Well, I'm joined now by GBNews star Nigel Farage. Nigel, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Look, should they be getting any allowance at all?
Well, look, they're getting accommodation, they're getting 3 square meals a day, they're getting free dentistry, something very few Brits can get these days on the NHS. They're getting medical treatment. Many of them have turned up without passports. They've travelled through illegal trafficking gangs. Why should we give them fag money on top?
OK, and what would you say to refugee charities who claim this will leave them destitute?
Well, I mean, if they're to come to Britain and to be accepted through a legal process as people who have got a right to be here as refugees, and then go out and get jobs and work and make themselves better off, well, that's all fine and dandy. But the state shouldn't be handing this out. And the problem is, that we are being regarded as Treasure Island. People know if they can cross the channel, they will get looked after. They will be able to work in the illegal economy at the same time, which too many of them are already doing. And the numbers are impossible. And there is a clear majority of British people who do not want this to continue. So, fine, the refugee charities can say what they like. They are standing up for a minority view in this country. And they, of course, all have a hidden agenda, which is they are all absolute Trotskyites. They don't believe in a nation state. They don't believe in boundaries. They believe we're all global citizens. They don't believe in borders. I mean, that's the real agenda here.
Yeah, I would argue as well, Nigel, that they don't tend to believe in the personal safety of every single individual in this country. Why is nobody at frontline politics standing up to some of these so-called refugee charities?
It is astonishing. I've tried to fight some of these people. The trouble is they're well funded. If you make the slightest mistake, they get their lawyers onto you immediately. But I've done my best to expose what Care for Calais and others have been doing over the course of the last few years. The surprising thing is there's virtually nobody in Parliament, virtually nobody, out of all those 651 MPs, prepared to stand up and say these things. And that's why we now have a disconnect between Westminster and the country on illegal immigration, on legal immigration. This gap is even bigger than the one we saw in the run-up to the Brexit referendum on membership of the European Union. London, the politicians, most of the media are completely out of touch with where the country is. We are an open-hearted, generous nation, far more so, actually, historically, than any of our European neighbours. What we don't like is having the mickey taken out of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. And you talk about our European neighbours. Over in France, Marine Le Pen, of course, has handed President Macron somewhat of a humiliating defeat. So Macron was forced to toughen up his flagship immigration bill in order to get it through the French Parliament. So under the new legislation, immigration quotas will be reintroduced and migrants in France will face tougher conditions to get residency permits. Look, is this another sign of the tide turning, do you think, on this open border mayhem? What do you reckon?
Oh, something very big is happening. I mean, Macron last night completely U-turned on pretty much everything he's ever stood for as the great modern liberal, Schengen supporter and all the rest of it. His party bowed to the Marine Le Pen agenda and the centre ground of opinion in France. It led to a split in his own party, a ministerial resignation. But he thinks, you see, now that I've done this, the threat of Le Pen will diminish. Well, let me draw a parallel. When I was called a fruitcake and a lunatic and other things too, for daring to advocate that we should have a vote on leaving the European Union, David Cameron thought, right, if I give a referendum, we'd have shot the Farage fox. All he did was legitimise my position, that it was something we should be debating. And I think Marine Le Pen, and she looks pretty jaunty there, doesn't she, in these pictures you're showing? I think all of this says to me, and I've said it before, but I'll say it again, she will one day be the president of France. It's coming.
Look, Nigel, I wanted to ask you this for a little while, actually. I had to wait for you to get out of the jungle. How do you see this panning out? OK, so next election looks like it's going to go to Labour. I don't think anyone realistically believes that we're going to end up seeing much tougher border control there. Possibly Reform might do well at the next election. Are the British public going to have to wait something like 5 or maybe 10 years to get a proper force in politics that actually deals with immigration? Many people will think that's just too late. The country will have gone by then.
Here's the irony, that Brexit Britain is now doing worse than the other countries. You know, Geert Wilders is probably going to become the Prime Minister in the Netherlands. Le Pen will take over in France. The EU itself overnight has announced a new migration deal, doing what I told them they should do back in 2015 in the European Parliament. I said to them, people crossing the Mediterranean who have no right to be refugees should be sent back. The EU today say they will allow member states to do that. And here we are, floundering, languishing. And the most interesting thing that happened in UK politics whilst I was in the jungle was the Jenrick resignation. He resigned as immigration minister, basically saying that this government is more worried about upsetting people on the international stage by being seen to be in breach of the United Nations 1951 Convention, or indeed the ECHR. It's more worried about that, how it looks on the world stage, than it is about delivering the promises it made in the run-up to the last election and the will of the British people. So yes, I'm afraid we are way behind the curve on this, and it's going to take a long time to sort out.
People talk about a globalist agenda, don't they, and a globalist elite, and then right in front of our very eyes and noses, we can see people who are, as you've just said there, more concerned about annoying people on the international stage than they are about the people who actually vote for them. You just wonder how people can continue to question that. But look, from France to mainland Europe as well, beyond France, to America now, where Donald Trump has been declared ineligible to run for US president by Colorado's Supreme Court. It ruled that he engaged in an insurrection because of his involvement in the January 6 riots. Nigel, are the anti-democratic attempts to stop Trump's return to the White House getting out of hand now?
This happened before. It happened before. In 1860, 10 southern states disbarred a man called Abraham Lincoln from being on the ballot, but he still won the presidency. But that happened as America was preparing for a bloody civil war of the loss of 750,000 lives. My fear is that the way these political appointees have behaved in Colorado last night sends a very bad message, which is, we have decided to remove from you your democratic rights to have the option to vote for a candidate you may choose. And by the way, this applies in March in Colorado. The primary for the Republicans takes place in March. So this is much more imminent than the November 2024 general election. And in doing so, they've given succor to states like Maine. Maine will make a similar decision, or at least have a vote on a similar outcome over the course of the next few days. We could finish up with lots of Democratic states removing Trump from the ballot. And that is why the American Supreme Court has to forget about Christmas holidays. The American Supreme Court needs to rule very quickly on Article 14 of the US Constitution, something written in the wake of the Civil War that has never, ever been used for political ends, ever. The American Supreme Court must put a stop to this, because you know what? If you remove people's right to vote, you force them to take other measures. And what happened on January the 6th will look like a Sunday afternoon tea party unless we get back some sense of perspective in America. What has happened is truly appalling, but you know what? Rather like Abraham Lincoln in 1860, all it's doing is making McDonald more and more popular.
Nigel, thank you very, very much. That was Nigel Farage there.